And so I was crying and vocalizing my sorrow to God, and I heard audibly in my room a voice mocking the exact things that I was saying, like, I'm so sorry, God, please forgive me. I heard this stuff in religion, but I had no experience with it whatsoever.
I would be sound asleep, and 3 very loud knocks at the door or on the wall, and I'd go open up the door, and there's nobody there.
When the Lord speaks, he's like a coach. Even when a coach rebukes you, he encourages you. It's like, you failed at this, but be strong. Pick up your head, start again.
All right, so I'm going to let you two introduce yourselves because I won't be able to do it justice. But Gabe, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I am a full-time youth minister and a Catholic lay evangelist. That is a fancy way of saying a YouTuber, unfortunately. So I've got a very popular YouTube channel called Gabe After Hours, where we try to call people to a deeper relationship with Christ. And in our channel, it's through the Virgin Mary and how we can see Jesus through her in the most pure and most loving way. So I was like really shocked when you invited me. I was like, this is true ecumenism here, because I'm like super to the right on Marian devotion.
Well, we're going to get into some of that today.
Yes.
So, but also, and for our topic on spiritual warfare, you have a book coming out.
I've got a book coming out, and I've got a lot of experience not dealing with exorcisms, because a lot of people don't realize that spiritual warfare happens on a daily basis at lower levels that people aren't aware of. So dealing with diabolical obsession, diabolical oppression, it's more common than people realize.
Absolutely. No, we're going to get into all that. And not Billy Joel, but you were telling me you get Billy Joel, Paul Giamatti, and Derek Jeter.
Those are the 3 I get compared to.
The Holy Trinity, if you will.
I can see Billy Joel, Derek Jeter is a stretch.
Oh, I think you can pull it off, right?
So my name's Father Barton Geger. I teach graduate theology at Boston College, focusing mainly on St. Ignatius Loyola and the spirituality and history of the Jesuit order. I also teach courses on the discernment of spirits, which we'll be talking about today. And one of the things that I do for the Archdiocese of Boston is, like every diocese, it's frequently approached by people who believe that they or someone they love is being harassed by something spiritual, something demonic. And so that's when I'll get a call, and I will go visit the person along with some colleagues who have a background in psychiatry or psychology. And we practice the discernment of spirits. We talk to the person and do some prayers with the person to determine whether this is possibly something truly demonic or psychological in some form.
Okay. Now, I know this is going to be, folks, you're in for such a treat here. Father Bart, let's start, just because I know some people are like, wait, for the skeptic out there is like, demons, really? You're a very learned scholar, to quote St. Ron Burgundy. Tell us, you shared a couple of these anecdotes on the Exorcist Files, but could you share a couple just quick anecdotes and help listeners establish what you have seen personally and why you actually, beyond just theologically, why you know experientially that demons are a real thing?
Right. I mean, I want to preface this by saying, in my experience, a lot of people will ask me for that kind of story, but I always like to tell people, if they don't believe the words of Jesus and St. Paul and the consistent testimony of the church for 2,000 years, they're not going to believe anything I say, right? But that being said, shortly after I got involved in the ministry, and this was not a ministry I went looking for, it was very much thrown into my lap, where I had been a priest for 10 years. And then all of a sudden, just out of the woodwork, people started coming up to me, total strangers, anything you can think of, saying, Father, I think I've got a demonic problem of some kind. And I'm wondering, what in the world is going on here, right? And so this was going on for a while until I realized I think the Lord was asking me to get involved in this ministry in some way. And I went to a conference for exorcists in Mundelein Seminary in Chicago. This would have been about 12 years ago. And I told that story to priests who had been exorcists for a long time, and they all started laughing. And they said, oh yeah, we got called the same way. God just sends you people until you get a clue, right? But what struck me, to answer your question, is that about 3 or 4 months after I started doing the ministry, about 3 or 4 months after I had my first pretty serious case, things started happening that I had been told in advance would probably happen. So, for example, priests had warned me a classic way that the enemy will try to scare priests off is by putting flies in their chalice when they're getting ready, when they're saying mass, they're getting ready to consecrate the cup. And sure enough, it was Christmas Eve. And I was doing a mass for the university there. And middle of winter, obviously, very, very cold. and I look down at my chalice, and there's a big old bottle fly swimming in the chalice. And I immediately thought that's almost certainly what was going on, right? You can't know for sure, but it's the middle of winter. So, and then the very next week, Sunday evening, I was saying Mass again, and there was another bottle fly in the chalice, right? And then about 3 weeks later, it happened a third time. And now that had never happened to me in my 10 years of being a priest, and I've said Masses in jungles and everything else, right? So at some point you have to say, okay, this is not coincidence. This is a little thing the enemy's trying to do to scare you off, to just say, hey, I notice what you're doing and I don't like it, you know.
One last one, just because I remember this one. There's an old Tony Orlando song, "Knock 3 times on the ceiling." If you want me, that is not what happened when you got 3 knocks on the door. You were telling me that sometimes one of the manifestations is mysterious knocks on the door.
That's right. That happened to me. That was going on for a long time. That happened on and off for several years after I started the ministry, where I would be sound asleep and 3 very loud knocks at the door and or on the wall, and I'd go open up the door and there's nobody there. And, I just kind of laugh about it. And because, the Lord's going to protect you. So that's the whole point. It's all kind of show to get you scared. But if you keep your head and you realize that the Lord is in control of everything, it doesn't bother you after a while. And so I just laugh about it, say a prayer, and go back to sleep. One of my favorite stories, St. Teresa of Avila was a mystic and the greatest female writer of the 16th century, a Carmelite nun. And the enemy was trying to scare her very badly. And she woke up in the middle of the night and saw the devil at the foot of her bed. And she just said, "Oh, it's only you," right? And then she goes back to sleep. So.
That's how you address it,
right?
Of course. Go back to sleep.
Obviously.
And a good thing to point out is that it's also a sign that you're doing good work. Like St. John Vianney, whenever he would be harassed by the devil, he would say, "Oh, I'm going to catch a big fish tomorrow." And then sure enough, like this penitent who hadn't been to church in 30 years would show up. So it's a good sign if you have his attention and you're being a good man. Right. So
now, Gabby, you obviously have also had some experience. Father Bart's not alone in his interactions with that, but what has your experience been?
So mine started off, unfortunately, because I was the victim of diabolical. So there's different categories. So I was having a diabolical obsession, which is where the demon will infiltrate your mind, and it's not just a normal temptation. It almost feels like you have a cloud around you, where if you're driving a car and somebody's going to grab the steering wheel to run your life off the road, you have the freedom to keep it on the road, but it just is an overwhelming temptation. And so I grew up without a father, and that left a deep hole in my heart and a disregard for the relationship between men and women. And so from a young age, I was addicted to pornography, and it wasn't something that I thought twice about. The world was telling me, this is normal. Everybody does this. And then I had a longing for love and authentic, relationships, and it wasn't being satisfied because I had no religion also. And so I was looking at pornography practically every single day from the time I was like in the 9th grade of high school up until I was in my 20s, early 20s, maybe late teens. And I started to take these theology courses, and the religion was actually making a lot of sense to me because they were teaching me things about original sin and concupiscence and disordered inclinations. And I was like, I can relate to that. Like, that explains why I'm always losing my temper with the people that I love the most. Like, there's something interiorly wrong with me. So I got it. And even though I'd encountered the Lord in prayer, I'd never changed my life. And during Lent, Catholics have this tradition of like giving things up. And it should be giving up things that lead you closer to God. But in a lot of circles, it's like, I give up chocolate. Yeah. And so this campus minister, she was a religious sister. She was going around the circle and she asked me, "What are you giving up?" And I was like, "I think chocolate." And then she just she snapped. I think she saw my duplicitous life, that I was like doing churchy things, but on every night I was partying, drinking, trying to get women. I wasn't very successful sometimes. And she said, how about you give up mortal sin? And I was like, which is a grave sin that you're doing knowingly and willingly. And I was like, you know what? That's a great idea. I think I'm going to try that. And so I was like, that's what I'm giving up. I'm giving up sin.
For Lent.
For Lent. Yeah.
Just for Lent.
Yeah. And I went home, and within 1 hour, I had looked at pornography and committed solitary sin. And so God gave me an awakening. He opened my eyes and gave me the gift of true contrition, where like I was genuinely sorry because I realized that I was a slave and that I wasn't just doing these things because I wanted to. And so I was crying and vocalizing my sorrow to God. And I heard audibly in my room a voice, a very high pitched, I wouldn't even try to mimic it because it would mess with everybody's ears. A very high pitched voice mocking the exact things that I was saying. Like, I'm so sorry. God, please forgive me. But it was very, very scary, especially for somebody who had no, like, I heard this stuff in religion, but I had no experience with whatsoever. And so I had heard a story of St. John Vianney, the priest I had mentioned earlier. And so just instinctively, I said, St. John Vianney, pray for me, because he was the only person I'd ever heard of that had encounters with the devil. In a moment, it was gone. The next day, I went to my campus minister and I was like, sister, I think I have a demon. What do I do? And so I think she saw this as the opportunity to like, all right, he's open. Yeah. And so she's like, take this rosary, take this pamphlet. Do you know how to pray this? I was like, I've never prayed this ever before. So I took the rosary, I took the pamphlet, and I was sitting up on my bed, I'm sorry. And the moment that I began, because it starts with the creed, I believe in God. So I said, I believe. And the moment that I said, I believe, a force grabbed me by the shoulders, slammed me on the bed, was choking. It was only moments, but it felt like an eternity. Like I was being choked. The room was ice cold. And I couldn't scream. My mom was in the other room, so I was trying to scream for help. And I heard a voice interiorly say, pray. And I was like, I couldn't get words out. And then it said, pray in your head, say the Hail Mary. And I had no relationship with the Virgin Mary, because you might say, why didn't you call out to Jesus? Like I was just didn't know what to do. And that's what I heard in my mind. And when I said it interiorly, I felt that there was a release on my throat. And then I was able to mutter, I was like, Hail Mary. And when I uttered the name of Mary, all of a sudden everything went away and the room stopped spinning. And I was like, this is real. And I had radical change of life. So I got on the internet and I was like, demon choking, pornography. Like I was trying to figure out what was
typed in demon choking pornography.
I know. Don't do that at home. Do not do that at home. This was the early days of the internet. People weren't so creative.
Dial-up connection.
Yes. And so I came across like there are things that you can do that are intrinsically disordered that invite demons in. And so I had apparently had a demon of lust with me for probably the majority of my life that never manifested because I wasn't getting any closer to God. He was letting me play church, but he did not want me to have a real relationship. Because what people mistake about the Rosary is that it's first and foremost a walk through the life of Christ. It's an immersion in the early stages of Christ's life, his public ministry, his crucifixion, where you're like spending time there. And yeah, you're saying words, but the main important thing is that daily you're coming back to Jesus. And the devil did not want that. And for good reason, because now I tell everybody, like it totally radically changed my life.
Yeah, we kind of talked a little bit and asked you guys if you had any stories of like those crazy moments where God kind of invaded your life.
And I remember before I came to Boston, I was in Denver. And when I came to Boston, I was wondering if the Lord wanted me to continue doing the exorcism ministry. And very shortly after I got to Boston, I said a prayer to the Lord, if you do want me to continue this ministry, I could use a few relics, because it's not something you can find very easily. Those are sacred objects. And because that would be very helpful. And I also said I could also use some colleagues who could help me. And a week later, I came home from the office and there was a FedEx box on my front step. And from someone I didn't know in Virginia. And I opened up the box and it was full of relics. And the letter was from an ex-priest who had collected those relics over the years. And he got dismissed from the priesthood. I don't remember why, he didn't say. But he still had those relics. And he said, I just wanted to give them to a priest who could use them. How he got my name, I have no idea. But I wrote him a letter and I said, sir, whatever it is you did wrong in the past, I want you to know the Lord is still working through you, And I think that meant a lot to him.
He had no way of knowing you? You didn't tell him?
No way. I have no idea why he chose me or what from his human perspective he was thinking, And so that just stunned me. Yeah.
And that was God saying, hey, keep so, I mean, maybe it's a lesson for our listeners too, right? It's like, you look for, Lord speaks in many ways, but if you're torn on God, is this the right path? Like, I need you to just give me a little boost. And like that sounds like an endorsement, like keep doing what you're doing.
Well, another little example of this, while I was still in Denver, remember how I said the Lord started sending me people and you wonder, it's like, okay, am I reading too much into this? That kind of a thing. Is this really the Lord saying something or not? And I remember it was one Friday night And I said, Lord, I think you're trying to tell me something. You know that I'm a very dense guy. If you want me kind of involved in this ministry, can you kind of make it overtly obvious sometime soon? 24 hours later, I was getting ready to say Mass on a Saturday evening, and 2 different people came up to me within the space of 15 minutes, total strangers, to say, Father, can you help me? I think I got a problem, right? And I just looked up at the Lord and I said, okay, you made your point. So little miracles like that I've benefited from many times over the years.
So I want to add to that. Like, so when Catholics have saints, like, so it's just that we believe that these people in heaven and their life is something that you should imitate. And you can see how Christ worked through them. So I was making a documentary on St. Maximilian Kolbe, who was a martyr at Auschwitz. He gave up his life for a prisoner because the prisoner had a family. And so he's crying, my children, my wife, and he offered himself up. And it's a beautiful, incredible story. So I'm making a documentary on him. And in my church, we have a relic of his, a first-class relic. It's a piece of his beard that they saved when they were giving him a haircut. People were like, this guy's holy. We're going to save his facial hair. I know it's a little weird. It's weird. You got to get used to it. You got to get used to it. So during the making of the documentary, I would go to that relic and say, Maximilian, please pray for me. Please pray that I do the right thing. And as I'm walking back, and I did this every day for like a month. As I'm walking back, we have one more relic in a shrine to a saint named Saint Jose Maria. As I'm walking back, the Spirit of the Lord came upon me. It was just like a real sense of the presence of God. And I felt a rebuke coming from the direction of the relics of Saint Jose Maria. And so I was like, okay, let me just be open. And I felt like, again, I wasn't hearing words, but I felt like a guilt for having walked past his relics. If I believe that Maximilian Kolbe is kind of present over here because of this facial hair, and I have that same theology, I should at least say hello to Saint Jose Maria, ask him for a little prayer. And so I said, okay, Saint Jose Maria, I'm open. And I felt very deeply, one, he rebuked me. So again, this is a discernment of spirits. How does the Spirit convict you? Fear, anxiety, depression, temptation to sin. This comes from the evil one. When the Lord speaks, he's like a coach. Even when a coach rebukes you, he encourages you. It's like, you failed at this, but be strong. Pick up your head, start again. And you have this interior conviction. So I felt a rebuke about my fatherhood, about something that wasn't in my mind, but a sudden like conviction, like you need to change the way you act in certain circumstances. So I was like, oh, this must be from God because that's right. And it wasn't even in my mind.
Well, since we mentioned a little bit of the spiritual combat and discerning spirits, when we first interviewed you, Father Bart, you mentioned there's these, for lack of a better term, principles that St. Ignatius offers, right, in this realm. Could you maybe introduce us to this concept of discernment of spirits and how you go about knowing whether something is, to try and as much as possible know if something is an attack of the enemy or if it is simply just the trials of living in planet Earth?
So yeah, just as a basic review, for 2,000 years, Christians have believed that our thoughts and our emotions can come from one of 3 sources. We obviously have our human thoughts and emotions, whether those tend to good or bad. But then God and the holy angels can influence our thoughts and emotions for the good, and Satan and the demonic spirits can do the same. And so the enemy, for example, will cause us to think. So imagine, for example, a young woman at church, and she's just frustrated because she looks around and, you know, Father's preaching is terrible again. The music's terrible again. The church is half empty. Father's asking for money. She looks around and she sees all these hypocrites in the pews, right? And this thought enters her head. You know, you could have a much holier relationship with God if you just stayed at home on Sunday and made a cup of coffee and talked to God in your own way. All right. Now, notice that ostensibly, it seems like a good thought. If you want a deeper relationship with God, this is what you should do. So is that really the voice of God speaking to her? Or is that her own rationalization or the enemy messing with her? All right. And so the discernment of spirits is the Christian practice of looking for certain red flags, so to speak, looking for certain clues to indicate whether a certain thought or emotion is coming from God or not. Okay. And so as Gabriel said, it seems so obvious, but you'd be amazed how often we forget this basic principle that God is never going to leave us feeling restless and anxious and afraid.
We have to wrap up here. Would you guys each just maybe, if you want to even look to camera and just say, is there any advice you just from where you sit right now to any listeners out there who are struggling to believe in the supernatural, in the miracles, think they're under some sort of demonic attack, and I've been told that's crazy. That stuff doesn't happen. But any kind of final benediction encouragement?
Yes,
too.
100%. So my recommendation, if you're struggling with any type of grave evil and you feel like there's no freedom, I have seen consistent freedom from people who take up praying the rosary every day. I know that for a Protestant, that might sound like, I don't know, that might be a bridge too far. Try it just for 7 days. And the last part of the Hail Mary is an invocation asking Mary to please pray for me. You can leave that part out. When the rosary was originally introduced, that part wasn't there yet in the prayer. So you could just say the Lord's Prayer and the first half, which is 100% scriptural. Try that. I give you my word. I've never seen it fail. I'm writing a book called The Power of the Rosary, where I go through all of these various aspects. In fact, by the time this airs, it's probably available. The Power of the Rosary by Gabriel Castillo.
Talk to your doctor about the rosary.
That's right. I have seen it cure so many things. So that would be my one recommendation. And also, this is first and foremost, the will of God must be your heir. You must put your heart and mind on the will of God. And when that is your only priority and your only desire, you will see the angelic angels, the good ones, manifesting themselves through day-to-day activities, odd occurrences. And then you'll say, God, what are you trying to say to me? And all of a sudden you'll have an illumination and the will of God in all things, and you'll see miracles.
Just to elaborate on that, I would say no matter what it is that you're struggling with, remind yourself and remember that countless of our brothers and sisters are struggling with the very same thing. You're not alone. Countless have struggled with these things through the centuries, probably, and that God made us for each other. And so this is not a battle that you should fight alone, that you want to seek the help of others in the church to help you through this, right?
Yeah.
Amen.
Well, thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you to the Christian Broadcasting Network for giving us this platform, to letting us host this great conversation on spiritual warfare. And of course, thank you to Museum of the Bible for hosting us in this beautiful studio, giving us this beautiful space. It's so blessed to have this conversation in this room, in this wonderful museum.
Absolutely. And where two or more are gathered, no matter if they wear a collar or whatever denomination, where two or more are gathered in the name of Jesus, there he is also. So glad we could have this conversation with 5 people.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen. Love
Amen.
it. Thank you, guys.